Good afternoon. A long day for all of us. A lot of excitement for the first day of the conference as usual, but I'm really happy that you're here. And yeah, as I was introduced, my name is Mangirdas, and today I'll talk about the Firebase Remote Config and how you can use it to control your Flutter apps on the fly. But actually, I would like to start with a story, about my friend, which is Prank on Flutter, and he's a good friend of mine. But as his name implies, he's very interested into memes, into terrible jokes, into dad jokes. So actually, there's a proof. He did this prank for me like a few years back. And the thing is that Prank strongly believes that there are three main forces that runs the world. The first one is money, the second is love or passion, and maybe someone knows what's the third force? Anyone? Close enough? Dad jokes. Dad jokes is the essential part of anyone's lives, and it should be the main force that runs you throughout your life. And if you think about it, Prank is something there in between. He has a love, he has a passion for terrible jokes, for dad jokes, and now the only missing part there is for him to earn some money. And it's kind of straightforward for us as developers. We usually earn money by creating apps, and what kind of terrible app we could create? That's Punterest. Punterest is an app that is meant to provide a daily pun for a user. So basically, user has an app, it opens it daily, he sees a new pun, and enjoys his life, right? But here's the thing. Oh, actually, Prank is also enjoys development, and he made a prototype of this. So the app is very simple. You have just a single screen, a single card. You have a question or pun, and if you flip the card, you could see the answer or the the punchline, I would say. So very simple app. However, right now it's static. It has no connection to the internet, to any backend. And our goal today is, to make it work as a real product. And actually, we had a real quick conversation with Prank. So he reached out to me, and I know that when Prank writes me, it's usually not the best case scenario. So I was a bit skeptical. But once the idea was mentioned that we are creating the app for puns, for those who know me, I cannot resist this. And yeah, and actually, as you saw the prototype already, Prank has started created it using Flutter. So go Flutter, that's a good option, right? And then we started discussing like what we could use for backend. And I heard rumors that Firebase kinda is a very straightforward solution when you're using Flutter. It's easily integrated, so we can just use that for MVP, right? So Prank agreed, and he asked me the last very important question, but basically I blocked him, and we move on. So Firebase setup. Actually, this talk will have 5 chapters. I don't know why I call this chapters, 5 parts, let's say. And the first one is Firebase setup, but this this chapter specifically is very, very, very well explained in the official Firebase documentation. So I'll just go very quickly through the steps that are needed to create a Firebase project and how to connect Firebase to your app. Okay, so you create, first of all, you go to your Firebase console, you create a new Firebase project, come up with not so creative project name. Maybe I'll highlight this step because it's very important for us. Spoiler alert, we'll be using A/B testing a little bit later, so it will only work if you enable Google Analytics. So just make sure that this switch is enabled. If you are using Analytics, you need to map to your account. Follow me, you see the tag. And then we get to the Firebase dashboard. And in the dashboard, previously, there were only options that you could access where you need to create Android and iOS apps separately. But now Firebase also provides the Flutter app to create as an option. So we click on this beautiful icon. And then the Firebase provides the specific CLI commands that you could run and basically, connect your Firebase project to your specific app. So what we do from the code point of view, as I showed you previously, we have already a working prototype, which is static at the moment. So what we need to do is to add some Firebase dependencies. So we add the Firebase core because it's needed to connect our app to Firebase. And also, depending on what services we are using, we add other dependencies. So in this case, we will obviously use Firebase Remote Config because that's in the title of this talk, right? And we'll use Firebase Analytics because that's needed for some features and for the A/B testing. Then we execute the command that was provided for us. And since we are, I cannot say we are, since I am lazy enough to create those projects myself manually, the Flutterfire command executes and creates the Android and iOS apps automatically on Firebase end. So we just simply use it like this. Inside our main method, we could initialize the app, and that's basically it. We are connected to Firebase, and now we can access Firebase services, and we can use those in the app. So I started talking about Firebase Remote Config, but I didn't really mention what the Firebase Remote Config is. So Firebase Remote Config is a cloud service that allows you to change the behavior or appearance of your app without requiring an app update, meaning you could change those values on the fly, and this will be synced with your device, and you do not need to release a new app version for these features or properties, parameters to be accessed. So yeah, now we'll get to the essence or to the main juice of this talk. So if you think about Firebase Remote Config, as I see it, it's just a very huge JSON file that has key value pairs. In fact, values could be of 4 types. One of those are Boolean, then numbers, strings, and JSON types for bigger objects. And also in this JSON file, you could see some metadata, which is used to render this beautiful UI that you could see on the right. So this metadata defines maybe some descriptions where you are using these parameters. Maybe you want to group some related parameters together, not to get lost, and so on. So, but by the essence, I see this Firebase Remote Config just as a JSON file that is pulled from the server. That's basically it. And since the essence or the main part of our app is that we need to update the pun or this joke daily, obviously we need to do this remotely because it doesn't really make sense to change the daily pun and then ask the user to update the app. So we create a dedicated parameter for that. We create a daily pun, which is of type JSON. And this JSON consists of 2 properties. One of them is question and the other is answer. So those are the 2 sides of the card that you saw before. And yeah, and then we get to the code. So what I like to do in my code when I'm using Firebase Remote Config, so I create a dedicated service that takes care of initialization and also providing the parameters that you need to use. So for the init method, which is triggered while the app is launching during the splash screen, so it ensures that you are connected to Firebase Remote Config. Then you set the specific configuration values. We'll get back to these a little bit later. And also you define the specific loading strategy, which in this case is fetch and activate. So what it does, it fetches the values during the initialization and immediately activates those on the app. So these are accessible like from the ground up, right? And also the last method is just to retrieve the daily pun parameter that we defined previously. For the daily pun service, it just, I know it could be a repository or I just call it service. For me, everything is a service. Not a good practice, don't use that. But basically, yeah, you get the parameter from Firebase and you map it to Dart objects just to use it in your app. And as I mentioned, we'll get back to these properties about remote config settings. So the fetch timeout is pretty straightforward. If you cannot load the remote config after 10 seconds in this case, you'll get an error and you need to handle it somehow. But the important thing there is the minimum fetch interval. Basically, this value defines for how long the Firebase Remote Config is cached on your device. Meaning the default value is 12 hours, by the way. But in our app, we are updating the pun daily, meaning this 12-hour period is quite long, and it could even lead that the user, opens the app before the pun was updated, and maybe the daily pun is not provided at that specific date. So a very simple and very straightforward and very bad solution to this is to set the minimum fetch interval to duration 0, like do not use caching at all, or maybe set it to several minutes, but that could lead for some nasty quota limitation issues, and you could get even more errors out of that. So to cope with these problems, actually quite recently, Firebase team introduced a concept as real-time remote config. So what it does is that for the first time, you're loading the Firebase remote config that you defined. It is cached on your device, and then your app opens a connection with the Firebase remote config server and basically waits for the update. What it does, when you change the value inside the Firebase remote config, it notifies the app that, okay, we invalidate your request, and now you need to refetch the values because these are changed on the server. The only thing that's missing there and that you need to handle is, pulling is handled for you, but you need to update your UI, you need to update your state of the app and take care of that. So how it changes our code, so we just expose the stream of the remote config updates through the service, and also we expose the activate method because you need to handle that as well, because the update only notifies you that, look, there's an update, these are values that we updated, but you still need to take care of the activation and all the other stuff. So on the right, in this app, I was using Riverpod, so you could see that we are just subscribing to the stream, and then we activate this value, and then also invalidate our providers so that they could update the UI. And this is the demo. So you could see that this app is what you saw previously, just the values are now pulled from the Firebase remote config. And if we update the config remotely, almost immediately it should be updated in the UI, and we have a new PUN available on our device. So technically, we implemented the app right, and we can end the talk here. But it's only chapter 2, so three more to go. And Firebase remote config, so when I say that it's just a JSON file, that was understatement, I would say, because on top of that, Firebase also provides a lot of useful tools that you could use. So one of those is Firebase Remote Config Conditions. And conditions is basically allows you to use the same parameters, but the values that are returned for your users depends on various criteria like user location, device type, datetime, operating system, and so on. So we'll see where we can use that. And I don't know if you've been in a situation, but I've definitely been there when you are very happy about a new feature, you release it to your users, but then you go to the monitoring page and you see those, I don't want to say ugly, but those tricky errors creeping up one by one, and you realize that you need to maybe revert this feature, or maybe you need to release a hotfix. So if you're a really great person, really great developer, you immediately release the hotfix. But the problem with that is that usually users are very slow at updating their apps, and it doesn't always work, right? So a good way to do this is like to notify the users that update is here, and maybe it would be nice if you update our app because it could lead to errors or something like that. But there's another problem. You cannot really notify your users globally if you are creating cross-platform products, because some apps could be approved a little bit faster than the others. In my case, it's always with the iOS. And yeah, and we need to use some kind of conditions, you see where this is going, to define what specific platform should be updated, right? So that's what we do. We go to the Firebase Remote Config dashboard, we go to Conditions tab, and we create a new condition. So in this case, we need to separate, we create a separation between platforms. So this app is created only for Android and iOS. So what's enough for us is only create the condition for Android. So this condition detects if the device that is using this parameter is Android, it will return true. Otherwise, it will return false. So this is how our parameter looks like. So I created a dedicated parameter for app version. So basically, if we update or release a new app version, we set this value in the Firebase Remote Config. And later I'll see how it works and how it notifies the users about an app update. So what's important to notice there and what's new there is that we are using condition. So by default, we are releasing an app update, but it is optional. But in Android case, like let's say we crashed Android for a reason, or maybe accidentally, I don't know. And yeah, and we said that, okay, this update for Android is mandatory and the is optional flag is false. So how it looks in the code, actually the Firebase Remote Config service part is identical that you saw previously. We just exposed this value, but there's an app update service. Uh, uh, Tricky code, but basically what it does, it checks the current version of your device and compares this value to the one provided by the Firebase Remote Config. So if the Firebase Remote Config provides a newer value, it means that you need to update your app. Simple as that. And also in your UI, we see that whether update is available or not. If it's available, we show the app update model. If not, we just route to the home page and you can continue using your app. And this is happening on the splash page. Again, demo. So as I mentioned, on the right, you could see which is an iOS device. So if we release an app update for iOS, it should be optional. So yeah, we released an app update, and you could see that update is available, but there is a skip button. And if I'm playing a game, okay. So if you press the skip button over there, you could see that you can continue using the app. But however, if we change this device to Android, the update is mandatory, and you could see that there's no skip button, and we must update our app before using it. So not the best user experience, I agree with that, but at least it gets the job done, and you'll see how we can improve it a little bit further. And of course, I showed you only a single condition, which is detecting the platform, but let's say maybe we want to, I don't know, localize our daily puns, and maybe for different different users using other languages, we want, to change the pun value, so we can create a condition based on the language of the device. Also, we can combine 2 or more rules in a single condition. So let's say if we want to detect April's Fool's Day, and maybe when the user flips the card, show the Rickroll video or something like that, we can do the in between date range like this. Or also we could combine different conditions, like if you are building the Flutter app on iOS and you want to show something specific for the user that opens the app for the first time, you can detect the platform and also detect that, okay, this app is used for the first time, and maybe you show a promo or tutorial onboarding, whatnot, maybe a map where to find the venue. So different conditions, and also Firebase is nice enough if you're using conditions that requires a specific Firebase SDK version, it notifies you, and you should be aware, and you are aware that whether this will work for your users or not, whether your SDK is up to date or not. Whew. Chapter number 3. Cheers. Don't forget to rehydrate. Cool. Chapter number 4, it's feature flagging. And why we needed this is because we realized that we have the app that shows the daily pun, but I am not sure if I am funny or not. So a good way to do this is to implement some kind of laugh-o-meter. If the device detects that the user is laughing, it basically sends an analytics event to Google Analytics, and we know that, okay, this pun performed really well, maybe the other don't. So I don't know how about you, but there's such a thing as cross-platform PTSD. It's when you are building cross-platform applications and you are using some native logic, and usually this native logic is very flaky. And if you are really, for instance, I'm always testing on iOS because that's just comfortable. It's not an Apple promo, but I'm using this PC, so it's just easier to test it on iOS. And sometimes I'm lacking, I hope that Android conference attendees do not hear this, but I'm lacking some attention to Android devices. And if you're using native functionality, it could happen that you are testing on one platform really well, but the other has a very flaky behavior, or maybe some unexpected error. So it would be nice, to somehow cope with this, or at least reduce the risk of such cases. Of course, one of the solutions you have already seen, you can force app update, but as I mentioned, the UX is not that great in this case. So a common practice to use is to use the feature flags or feature toggles. So feature toggle, for those who are not familiar with the concept, is basically a Boolean flag in your code that hides your feature by default, and you could later on, after releasing an app update, you could enable this remotely, and then this feature become available for the user. So this is feature flags in a nutshell, I would say. But the problem with the basic feature tags is that It either enables a feature flag for everyone or disables for everyone. So usually a better practice to use is to use non-binary feature flags. Apparently that's a concept, is that you could enable a feature feature flag only to a particular group of your users. Like you start with enabling this flag for 20% of users. You see that there are no errors after releasing this feature. Okay, then we can increase this threshold to maybe 50% of your users, and if everything is okay, then we can just release this feature, or we can kill this feature and like change this value to false. That could also be the case. So what's good about Firebase Remote Config is that this non-binary feature flagging, it comes out of the box, and if you want to use it, you just define a new condition of your specific threshold, and then you could use the user in random percentage rule, and you define, that threshold, and it just works. So let's say in our case, we want to hide or enable the pun rating feature, so detecting the laugh, as I mentioned. So by default, as you could see, the value is false, but if the user gets into this 20% user group, you can set this value to true, and thus we can test this feature really well. Again, the code, the Firebase Remote Config service, very similar what you see already. We just exposed the parameter. Also, I created the analytics service, the service that sends the event to Google Analytics, and then we just expose those methods to our UI. This is the business logic. And then in our UI, we have an audio listener, basically a tool that detects whether you're laughing or not. And if the feature flag, the rating enabled one, returns true, this is enabled. It will send an event to analytics, and also the listener will be working. And if not, it will just be disabled by default. And actually, we can test this out. Can you make some noise, actually? That's true. Yeah, I cannot believe I fell for it. I implemented this on click. So actually, yeah, if it detects the audio, you press on the title, and yeah, you could see that we are sending the event to the analytics. And if we disable this toggle, if we disable this toggle, I hope you'll hear my clicker working, or maybe it's easier with the mouse. So I can click this, and yeah, it just doesn't work anymore. So that's the feature toggling. We can enable this or disable remotely. Getting back to the last section, which is A/B testing. So the thing is that not everyone is actually making a lot of noise when laughing, especially that's me. I'm usually just pushing a little bit more air through my nose, and that's my laugh. So as you can imagine, audio listener does not really work in those cases. So we realized that we should A/B test, and maybe we should simplify this process and simply add a button. It's like a very convenient option, a very popular one, because you even see this component in the counter app that you install, is the floating action button with a plus or with a heart or whatever you add there, which you can tap if you find this, the pun interesting for you. So that's exactly what we did. I created a specific parameter that returns the enum value that should be used in our app. So that's either audio or button. So these are two types, that defines which way of rating should be used. And then we can create an A/B test for it. So we go to the, previously we were using the conditions tab. Now we go to the next one, which is A/B test. We create a new A/B test, come up with another not very interesting name. Then we define the specific platform. There is a limitation for Firebase A/B testing. The main limitation is that you could only run an A/B test only on a single platform. So you should either choose, whether you want to test this on iOS or Android. If you want to test something on both platforms, then you need to create two separate A/B tests. I think that's not very convenient. I don't know why this limitation is there, but it's just not possible to run the same A/B test on different platforms. Also, you can define the user group that you want to test. So in this case, we just want to push it to all of our users. Then we define the goals. So in our case, we are sending this rate pun event to our analytics when the audio laugh is detected, or whether the user pushes the button. So in this case, we just see how this analytics, how this performs overall. And also there, you could define some additional metrics that you could track, like whether it crashes your user devices, or maybe there's some retention metrics that you need to find, so you can add those there as well. And then this is the essential part of the A/B test. You define different variants that you want to test. So as you already know, the baseline or the default behavior of our app is audio detection, but also we want to test out now whether the button will perform better. So we just add a new rule for the same parameter. As you can notice, we're using the same rating type, but we just define a new value. And also, lastly, you define the variant weights. So by default, these are 50-50, so meaning your A/B test, or if you're running ABC test, like it would be split into three equal parts. So you could define different, different weights for your test. By default, 50-50 does the work. And what's left, you have all the data that you input, that you had inputs before there, and you just start the experiment. And when you check your Firebase Remote Config now, the specific parameter, you could see that experiment is running. And while the experiment is running, you could define whether it will run for 7 days, for 30 days, or maybe for a custom amount of days. While the experiment is running, values are used from it. Otherwise, it will use the default value. So now, based on in which random user group the user gets into, either the audio or button value will be returned. So how it looks from the code, again, Firebase Remote Config service, I think you're seeing the same pattern like for the third or fourth time now. And that's actually the best thing about Firebase Remote Config, in my opinion, is it doesn't matter whether you're just using the very simple, straightforward parameters, whether you're using conditions, whether you're using A/B testing, the API or the interface that you're using from your code is identical. You're just pulling the parameter, and everything else is handled for you. So that's the beauty in the code. And in the simplicity, as I mentioned, rating type is just an enum with some helper functions to define, which one is used at the moment. And we also expose this receive parameter to our UI from the business logic. And then you could see the same homepage, like we check the rating type. If the current rating type is audio, we enable the audio listener, which is a fake one, as you could understand. And for if the rating type is button, then we enable the floating action button. Again, demo, do not clap this time. So if the audio is enabled, if I click on the app title, you could see that we see the same behavior. If we nice. If we enable this A/B test for that, we could see that floating action button is there. And now once we click on that, you could see that the behavior is the same, just the approach is a little bit different. And after that, we could check after some time. Usually it takes like 2 or 3 days, as I tested, to see the results. You could see that in our case, the floating action button actually outperformed the baseline by 60%, meaning that we should definitely use the floating action button because it performs better. And yeah, just have in mind that daily punts were identical during this experiment, so my humor didn't affect these results. So that's the A/B testing in a nutshell. So to summarize the talk, use Firebase Remote Config parameters when you want to change them on the fly. Use conditions when you want to return different values for your parameters based on users with different criteria, like language, region, platform, and others. Use feature flagging when you want to enable or disable features, and we have a better user experience when trying out new things in your apps. And also do not hesitate to A/B test, because as you saw, it's pretty straightforward. These are free, so you can just test it out and see how your app performs. A little bit of the promo. So this whole talk, a little bit a different version of that, but basically the content is kind of similar. So on my blog, Kazlauskas.dev, you could get there and you could see the written version of the same talk. And save trees, stay solid. Thank you very much.